to wrap up that theme, put it together in such a way that will allow us to continue thinking about this throughout this coming year that we're about to face. Knowing God. John chapter 1, very beginnings of the Gospel of John. The Apostle John writes about John the Baptist and says as he's standing near two of his disciples and looking at Jesus as he walked by, he said, "Behold, the Lamb of God." And the two disciples heard him speak, and they followed Jesus. Then Jesus turned, and seeing them following, said to them, "What do you seek?" And they said to him, "Rabbi," which is translated teacher, "where are you staying?" And he said to them, "Come and see." We've talked about this concept of knowing God and getting closer to Him. As we take in these passages and sing these songs that correspond, I'd like you to think about the words as we go through this process. It is a journey, our knowing God. It should be a daily journey that we draw closer and closer each day. Every day is filled with challenges. Every day is filled with temptations. But if we grab a hold of the moments where God is nearby and draw closer to Him, He is there to help us meet those challenges. Knowing God, as we've gone through over the last several weeks, many of the times looking at some of the different names that define Him in the Old Testament and are expressed even in the New Testament through Jesus. We grasp a greater concept of who He is and how desperately we need Him, especially in life's challenges, drawing nearer to God.
Draw me, my Savior,
knowing God begins with understanding His greatness, His holiness, His majesty. As we'd already read about the disciples from John chapter 1, that very beginning of Jesus' ministry, as Jesus came along and called some of those who would be His apostles, they left everything to follow Him. I imagine as they were going throughout that very first day and maybe that very first week, they stopped and considered, I just left everything. Hope I did the right thing. They looked at Jesus and they thought, it's got to be the right thing. In the early chapters of the book of John, the first miracle that He works, changing water into wine, and I'm sure after that episode, when they left the wedding feast, the apostles, along with Jesus, they're thinking in their mind, we made the right choice. Look at how great He is. We chose this person. At that time, maybe they didn't understand that this was the Son of God, but they were drawing closer to Him. They followed along and they'd watched the miracles He had performed. They'd watched the Sermon on the Mount, which was probably my perspective, a lengthy series of lessons. Matthew talks in 3 different chapters, 5, 6, and 7, about all of these lessons and the points that Jesus makes. And then as they go along, they're seeing the greatness of Jesus, and they've got to feel like they're drawing closer to God. And they were. In verse 23 of chapter 8 in Matthew. Now when He got into His boat, His disciples followed Him. And suddenly a great tempest arose on the sea, and so that the boat was covered with the waves. But He was asleep. Then His disciples came to Him and awoke Him, saying, Lord, save us, we're perishing. They didn't just row a little more fervently, but they looked to a carpenter because they saw something in Him. There was something He could do. Verse 26, but He said to them, why are you fearful, O you of little faith? And then He arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. And so the men, His apostles, marveled, saying, who could this be, that even the winds and the sea obey Him? When we talk about this great God, there is absolutely nothing that He can't do. Even down to the commanding of the seas and the winds, the currents, the oceans, whatever's out there, it's underneath His power. That the great majesty of God is there with them was just incomprehensible. I think it starts there for us when we think about drawing close to God, how great He is.
Wonderful Lord God.
Luke chapter 5, another occasion where the apostles are out. They're fishing. They capture a tremendous amount of fish upon the instruction of Jesus. And as they're hauling all of this fish into the boat, Peter, who is a fisherman by trade, who's probably seen occasions where he's had great catches and some where he's had none, backs up and thinks about this from a different perspective than a fisherman. As Jesus is there in the boat with him, and Peter's looking at this huge catch of fish, he's not thinking, boy, this is a story to tell. He thinks about the fact that it was instruction from Jesus that caused that to happen. And he looks over at Jesus and he says, "Depart from me, for I am a man that is sinful." Peter is grasping the greatness of Jesus. Isaiah gives us a very similar instruction as he has a vision in chapter 6, this younger Isaiah at the beginning. And he looks out and he sees these seraphim flying about around God. And they're shouting out, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God of hosts." And Isaiah, like Peter, recognizes his sinful nature. When we grasp the greatness of God, we can't help but stop and think about we don't deserve to be with him for the sin that we carry. And yet he stays with us. John chapter 6, in talking about Jesus, and at one occasion where his lesson was rather tough. So tough to the point that the multitudes who had been following him turned around and left. And then Jesus looked at his apostles and he asked them the question, "Will you go away also?" By this time, they realized there was no place else that they could even think about going that would compare. Yeah, the lessons are tough. The challenges are there. And yet, they looked at Jesus and said, "To whom else shall we go? You have the words of life." It's difficult following Jesus. But where else do we go? We talked several weeks ago about these people that were on this mountain or on nearby the mountain when Moses went up and the mountain shook and the thunder and the lightning on top and the cloud of smoke, and it caused great fear. And as we sometimes look at the rest of the world, we wonder, why do they not want to get near God? Well, they see the potential and they're afraid. But the apostles don't fear the message. They recognize the greatness of Jesus, and they say, where else can we go? I don't deserve to be here. But God allows me in his presence. He wants me in his presence. I don't deserve to be at home sleeping in late. Where else could I be? I don't deserve to be out there earning some extra money. If I could be here, I want to be here. I realize there are jobs, and sometimes we're called to struggles working in hospitals and other places where we've got to be on times when the church is assembling. But when we're here with God, how great a strength it is for us. And a reminder of the greatness of God. And then there's that passage in Luke chapter 7. Verses 36 to 39 is the highlight of it to me. In this occasion, a Pharisee of all things invites Jesus to come eat with him. It's not really to honor Jesus, and Jesus knew that. And when Jesus enters in, we can capture after reading the whole story that he's not treated very hospitably. Not like everybody else. And everybody could see the distinction, because when people come into the house, you have your feet washed. You're welcomed by the host. But Jesus wasn't. Such a contrast. And then of all things, while this is happening and they're gathering around and eating, and Jesus is being mistreated or disappreciated, however you want to describe it, this woman of the world comes in and comes before Jesus. In verse 36 we read, Then one of the Pharisees had asked him to eat with him, and he went to the Pharisee's house and he sat down to eat. And behold, a woman of the city who was a sinner. You can imagine what Luke is thinking here as he writes that word. When she knew that Jesus sat at the table of the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of fragrant oil and stood at his feet behind him weeping. And she began to wash his feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair of her head. And she kissed his feet and anointed them with the fragrant oil. Now when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he spoke to himself, saying, This man, if he were a prophet, would know what manner of woman this is who is touching him, for she is a sinner. Dare I get near God? This woman of the world said, You bet. It's where I need to be. No, she wasn't welcomed in the Pharisee's house. She just kind of stormed her way in. But there she stand at the feet of Jesus, bow down and wipe his feet with her hair. Yeah. Because she knew, in spite of the greatness of Jesus, that he desired to have her presence. That's incredible. What's crazy out of all of it is that the Pharisee needed Jesus just as bad, but he didn't really want to be in his presence. Oh, he had him in his house, but he didn't want to be near Jesus. And what a contrast. Dare I get near this great God? It's going to cost me. Yeah, I can change. And he opens his arms up and allows that. This great and loving God. Now with his son being here. And says, You're welcome in my presence. Come be with me. I take that as incredible.
My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God. My soul
John 13. And the supper being ended, and the devil having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, rose from the supper and laid aside his garments and took a towel and girded himself. And after that, he poured water into a basin, and he began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel which he was girded. How close does God want to get? Verse 6. Then he came to Simon Peter. And Peter said to him, Lord, are you washing my feet? And Jesus answered and said to him, what I am doing you do not understand, but you will know after this. And Peter said to him, you will never wash my feet. And Jesus answered and said, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. God's wanting to get near. We've got to do it his way. In this setting, a very strange way. And Peter felt totally out of sorts to allow Jesus to do that for him. But this is on Jesus' terms. Peter resisted. No, Lord, this can't be. And Peter was ready to get up until the Lord said, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. Peter wanted that. We've got to understand that we have to have that. We have to come to Jesus on his terms, take his challenges, accept all that's there with that in following Jesus and say, okay, I'm going to take it. Give it to me however it's going to come. As we used that word back a few weeks ago, Adonai, which calls him Lord, it's on your terms now. When we understand how that is and allow God to change and God to challenge, then wash me, God, just take on everything. Here it is. Just let me turn it over to you. But there's Jesus on his knees, reaching out in such a lowly manner and looking to wash. Realizing it's going to challenge. It's going to change. It's going to do things for us and to us like we could never imagine. But we have to be willing to allow that to happen. We have to be willing to surrender all.
I
in our surrendering, in our giving all to God, God gives us all that He has. Salvation through His Son, protection, guidance, direction. Psalm 18, verse 1. I will love you, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock and my fortress. Notice how personal the psalmist writes. And my deliverer, my God, my strength in whom I will trust, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I will call upon the Lord who is worthy to be praised. And so shall I be saved from my enemies. I can't imagine not having God nearby. I can't imagine dealing with life, the issues, the problems, the struggles, the grief, the sickness, the pain, the cancer, without God, rock, deliverer, fortress, protector. Sing the first verse of number 48. The Lord's my shepherd, I'll not want. He makes me down to lie in pastures green. He leadeth me in pastures green. He leadeth me the quiet waters by. Matthew chapter 27. Matthew is now recording Jesus' death and his crucifixion. After going through a mock trial, after being scourged, after going all the way out of the town up to a hill, he's hung on a cross, nailed to the cross. He's half dead, as it were. Verse 45, Matthew writes, now from the 6th hour until the 9th hour, there was darkness over all the land. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? People ponder what exactly happened. For out of all the time that Jesus walked on this earth, he was close to God. They were one, as Jesus would sometimes comment. My Father and I are one. And now he uses the words that seems to be abandoned. I'm alone. He felt that way. And perhaps it was because he was carrying the sin of the world that in that moment that happened. But when we choose to follow Jesus, we get crosses. But with those crosses, we have a God that never abandons us. We deal with the struggles. We fight hard, but we've got a God that loves us, a God that cares, a God that's with us, a God that sent his Son and challenges us and stands by us. So here we are, never alone. It's a reason, you see, to hold fast to God. It's a reason to keep on. That those challenges that are there, are there for us to choose Him. We come into this assembly, and in this assembly, we come close to God. Leave renewed. When you leave, be strengthened. When you go about next days, be strong. And if this morning you feel like you are not right with God, know that He's never abandoned you. Just get back with Him. If you've never been baptized into Christ, and you've been thinking about this, and you understand from the Scriptures the meaning and the importance and the value of it, then we're here to help you to stand with Jesus. Whatever your need, remember, we don't stand alone. No man stands alone. But if you need to come forward, come while we stand and sing this song.